Hey friends, hope you enjoyed that short piece. That was the prelude in D minor from Well-Tempered Clavier, book number 1 by J.S. Bach. And the reason why I played that piece, pardon me, is because it has a lot of a particular chord that I wanted to show you guys today. And that chord is the diminished chord. So diminished chords come in two main varieties. The triad, which is the basic form, is going to be 3 notes. And then it can also come in a 7th chord format, which is going to have 4 notes. So what I'm going to do in this lesson is show you how those chords are constructed, and we're going to work on just being able to hear them, and then we're going to look at how they function in music. So let's go ahead and dive in and look at the diminished triad. The diminished triad has 3 notes. The first one is the root. That's easy enough. The middle note is going to be a minor third above that root. Now, a minor third is 3 half steps. You can also think of it as being a whole step plus a half step. Same difference. So let's listen to that. That's our root, and then we go whole step, half step to get to our minor third. And of course, it's called a minor third because it is, in fact, native to the minor scale or a minor chord. So the beginning of a diminished chord is going to sound like a minor tonality, right? Because it has that minor third. So if we're assigning solfege, this is going to be do, and then me. It's a lowered third, right? Do, me. Okay? Now, be careful with diminished chords in solfege because it's not going to work out neatly the way major and minor do. Because a diminished chord is never going to occur as the tonic chord of any scale. Whereas, so in other words, if we start on do and we do our diminished chord, we're going to have to use some altered tones because it's not actually native to that do scale. So anyway, we're going to have do and me. Now, if it were minor, we would hear this third tone. Right? That would be do, me, and sol. But listen to what the diminished chord does. All right. Was that note higher or lower than the minor? Here's the minor. Here's the diminished. Hopefully you can tell it's lower. It's lower by 1 half step, and of course that gives rise to the name diminished. So it's just 1 half step lower in that top note than a minor chord would be. So diminished meaning smaller. So the outer interval is 1 half step smaller than in a minor chord. So the interval between the middle note and the top note is also a minor third. So this is a symmetrical chord because the interval between the root and the middle note is a minor third, and then again we have a minor third as our second building block. Each minor third is 3 half steps. What's 3 plus 3? 6. And 6 half steps is what we call a tritone. A fun and interesting way to remember that term, tritone, it actually refers to the notion that the tritone is 3 whole steps added together, which is in fact true. If you think about, let's say, starting on C, 1 whole step would give you D, the second one would be E, the third one would be F sharp, not F, right? And so therefore the interval between C and F sharp was called a tritone, meaning it was a span of 3 whole tones. So a 6 half step or 3 whole step span is called a tritone. Now, there are two fancy names for a tritone. One of them is Augmented Fourth, and the other one is Diminished Fifth. And for those of you that know a little bit of music theory already, you can probably guess when we use one term versus the other. We use the term Augmented Fourth when the tritone is named using two letter names that are 4 keys apart. So for example, if we have C and F sharp, C and F on the keyboard are spaced a fourth apart, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if the letter names correspond to an interval of a fourth, then we would call C to F sharp an augmented fourth. If, on the other hand, that very same key is labeled in a particular piece as G flat instead of F sharp. So for example, if we have C to G flat, and harmonically the same, but because of the different naming, it now corresponds to a span of a fifth in terms of the letter names, and therefore we would call it at that point a diminished fifth because it's 1/2 step smaller than a perfect fifth. So in the case of a diminished chord, we're going to call it a diminished fifth because it's replacing the fifth that we used to have in the minor. So as opposed to being an inflected fourth, right? It's not an inflected fourth. It's really a diminished fifth. Okay. So now we've got our diminished triad figured out. Let's make sure that we can hear it and sing it. So I'll give a pitch, and then we'll work on building the chord from there. So, da. So here's what you want to do. Start off like you're singing a minor, but then just let that fifth sink down a 1/2 step lower. It's going to sound a little unstable. It's going to sound a little spooky, a little Halloween-y, but just let it happen. So here we go. Da, da, da. All right, try singing that one on your own. Ready, go. Did you get all 3 notes? Ya da da. Now, if you're unsure of yourself, you could try connecting the dots with a scale like this. Da 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 da. So that would be whole step, half step, whole step, half step. That's your pattern. So each whole half little cell is going to give you a minor third, right? So it would be do, re, mi, fa. And then, what do we use for say? Yeah. I guess flat sol is say. It's funny, you almost never end up singing that in real life. And that goes back to what I said, that the diminished chord never actually occurs on the tonic. So you never end up doing do, re, mi, fa, say. It's kind of interesting how that turns out. By the way, the only place that the diminished chord does occur in the major scale, well, let's think about it. This would be a nice little challenge question for you all. And if some of you who have been in my workshops and classes before may have come across this. So a diminished chord has a tritone as its outer interval. Where in the major scale do we find a tritone outlined by 2 notes? Well, if we look at C major, for example, we're looking for a span of 3 whole steps in a row, because that's where the tritone is going to happen. So if we look at the white keys, yes. How about F, G, A, and B? That's 3 whole steps in a row. You might think, isn't that 4? No, it's 4 notes and 3 steps, right? A step is the distance between 2 notes. So 4 notes, 3 steps. So indeed, F to B is a tritone, right? And Now, to get a diminished chord from F to B, that would require us to use an A flat. That would not be in the key of C. Instead, we need to invert this and look at B to F, right? Which is going to also be a tritone. The neat thing about tritones is that you can flip the order and they're still going to be a tritone. So for example, BF, FB, those are both the same type of interval. Whereas if you think about another thing, like for example, CE, well, if you flip that, it's going to be a completely different shape, right? C to E is a third, E to C would be a sixth. But the tritone is exactly half of an octave, so it's 6 half steps, which is half of 12. And so that means that when you flip it, it remains the same. It remains the same type of interval when you invert it. So, that being said, the place that you'll find a diminished triad in the C major scale would be from B to F, like this. B, D, F. In solfege, we could think of that as being T, Re, and Fa. Okay? Now, the diminished chord is going to come up as the upper part of a dominant chord. So that's one place that you're going to hear it, is sometimes in a piece where it really is a dominant chord, aka Sol, Ti, Re, Fa. A dominant chord meaning a chord built on the 5th scale degree, okay, which is Sol. I should say a dominant 7th chord. But if I take away the root of that chord, aka the Sol, so listen to this. Dun, 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 dun. Now, if I take away the root, what's left is Ti, Re, Fa, and that's a diminished chord. So that's one place that you're going to hear it. Let's practice hearing this chord. Let's practice hearing this chord and singing it back. Okay, so we did one already. Let's do another one. I'll give you a tone, and then I want you to sing the diminished chord on that tone. So here we go. All right, here we go. Ready, go. Now, it might be a little tricky, so let's see if we can at least get the first minor third. So remember, it's going to be da, 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 like a minor scale, okay? Ready, go. Da, da, da. Now, the next trick is, can you do that again? You know, can you basically stack that on top of itself to obtain the second minor third? So da, 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 da. Don't be tempted to go up to that nice sounding 5th, right? It's not da 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 da. No. That's a minor triad. We want the unresolved feeling. Da 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 da. Right? And that unresolved feeling is due to the unstable nature of the tritone interval that defines this chord. A tritone is a very weird interval because it's halfway between two very stable intervals, a perfect 4th and a perfect 5th, which is an inversion of a perfect 4th. And those two intervals are quite stable. A perfect 5th consists of a ratio of 3 to 2, and then a perfect 4th. Let's see if I can get my math right. If that was 2 to 3, then that would be 4 to 3. Yeah, so a perfect 4th would be a ratio of 4 to 3. So those intervals both sound very consonant to the ear because the two waves that are being produced by the two notes coincide with a reasonable amount of frequency, because the frequencies are related by this integer ratio of 3 to 2 or 4 to 3. A tritone, the ratio is really, really weird. It's like some number that I'm not going to be able to calculate in my head, because it's actually what would it be? It's the 12th root of 2 times itself 6 times, whatever that is. So yeah, it's some ridiculous number that is just very, very unstable, and it just doesn't create any consonants. I'm doing this with my hands because this is me like modeling the two waves that are not actually coinciding, right? Boop, 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 just not matching up. So anyway, that's this sound. Now, I don't want you to come away from this thinking that diminished chords are ugly or bad. They're very colorful, and they're very, very useful, and they really make a lot of songs, pop, right? So let me grab my piece of paper here. A couple of famous uses for this type of chord. Well, one case would be in the Baroque period. It's really one of the most colorful chords that you'll hear in the Baroque period, and especially in that period, you'll have diminished chords over pedal tones, which just sounds really cool. Like that kind of thing, right? In the piece I played in the intro to this video, so in the right hand there, in that little section of the piece, that's a diminished chord, and it's being put over a pedal tone of D. So that's a classic Baroque gesture to build tension. So J.S. Bach, especially the Germans, Handel, Pachelbel, Buxtehude, those guys. But also the Italians as well, Vivaldi, Scarlatti, and those guys. But it's very German to use that as a tension building device. And for example, the famous and then you have that build up. That's the same exact type of chord. It's a diminished chord being held over a pedal tone. And then again in that same piece, hear that? That's a diminished chord. In that little descending sequence. Of course, that is another Bach piece. That's Toccata and Fugue in D minor that everybody knows. Now, let's just briefly touch on the diminished seventh chord, which is very, very easy to understand because we're just going to add one more building block of exactly the same type of interval. So we have our root, minor third, diminished fifth, which is itself a minor third above the minor third, and then we're going to go a minor third above that. Now, if you're looking at your piano, or if you have a good, map of the pitches in your head, you are probably at this point saying, "Oh, Kevin, that is a major sixth." And in one sense, you are right, because, for example, if you stack minor thirds starting on C 3 times, you will arrive at A. And yes, A is a major sixth above C. Did I say major sixth the first time? Well, if I didn't, I meant to. So major sixth. Now, the thing is, the way that these chords are actually written in practice, it's not so much that it's a major sixth, it's more that it ends up being a diminished seventh is actually the way the interval is named. So a great example would be to show you how the chord's built on B instead of C. So on the note B, you would have a B, a D, an F, and then the next note is natively would be an A if we were just stacking, in thirds, which is the principle behind triads and seventh chords. They're always stacked in thirds. So, quick aside, keep this in mind. Whenever you're naming seventh chords in root position, the letter names are always going to go in a skipping pattern. So, for example, B, D, F, A, C, E, G, B, D, F, A, C. They're going to correspond to one of these clusters in root position. So similarly with the diminished chord, if we're building it on B, it's going to be B, D, F, A, except A flat, not G sharp. You get what I'm saying? So because you have to stack the note names in a pattern of thirds, then you would call this upper note A flat, not G sharp. Now, in certain music, you might hear it as, you might see it as a G sharp, in which case you would have to reevaluate. Well, what you would do in that case, let's think about that. What if you saw B, D, F, G sharp? It's the same sound as B, D, F, A flat. But what you would want to do is think to yourself, how can I rearrange these letter names such that they are actually stacked thirds? Now, if you look at it, you can realize that take the G from the top, put it on the bottom. G, B, D, F. Now it's in root position. So if you see B, D, F, G sharp, it's actually just an inversion of a G sharp fully diminished seventh chord. So that leads me to one more cool topic that I wanted to share with you regarding these chords, which is their intrinsic symmetry. So the diminished triad has 2 minor thirds. The fully diminished seventh chord has 3 minor thirds, and it also has 2 tritones hiding in it. So for example, if we look at that chord B, D, F, and A flat, B to D is a minor third, D to F is a minor third, F to A flat is a minor third. Also, B to F is a tritone, and D to A flat is another tritone. So it's almost like the perfectly symmetrical chord. And here's where it gets really, really cool. The way that a fully diminished chord is typically used, it's typically going to be a 7 chord. And what I mean by that's a different term than seventh chord. A seventh chord is a chord that has a seventh. A 7 chord is a chord that is based on the 7th scale degree. So, for example, if we are in C, the 7th scale degree is B. Remember I said earlier in this video that the native location for a diminished chord is going to be on the 7th, on the T. We found that in C major. We found how the diminished triad naturally occurs on the notes T, Re, and Fa. Okay? And so that's the native place for the diminished triad and the fully diminished 7th chord. So let's take a look at how we would make a fully diminished 7th chord on the 7. So here's the key of C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now that's the root of our chord. So now we need to go minor third. So we've got B is our root. A minor third up would give us a D. Now we need our diminished fifth. That's going to give us an F. Now here's where we're going to go out of the key signature a little bit. So thus far we have been able to stay in the key signature of C major. But if we add another minor third, we're going to be on an A flat, and that is actually out of the key signature. So strictly speaking, a fully diminished chord, I think I'm saying fully diminished. That's the technical name for this type of chord. I realize I forgot to actually explain that, but the diminished seventh chord is called a fully diminished chord. So this fully diminished chord doesn't actually exist natively, aka via the key signature, in a major key. So it only exists via accidentals. So what that means is, like, in the key of C, if you want to do a fully diminished chord, you're going to have to write a flat into the music. It doesn't occur natively in the key. The same is true for minor. The difference would be in C major, we don't have to notate the B, the D, or the F as naturals because they're already in the key signature, and then you would have to write in the flat. In C minor, you would have to actually notate the B natural because C minor has a B flat, and then the rest you would be good. So it's in either case, you're going to have to notate one accidental. So that chord, the seventh chord built on the 7, is going to resolve to the 1 chord very strongly. And that's because the T that it's built on wants to resolve to Do, right? Also, the Fa wants to resolve to Mi. And then we have this extra added element of tension, which is it's actually a lay. So that A flat in our solfege system would be a lay, which is a lowered La, a flat La. That is going to resolve very strongly to Sol. So lay, Sol, right? And that's really the other half-step resolution, other than the big two that I always talk about in my videos, which are Ti, Do, and Fa, Mi. Well, the other one that sneaks in kind of in certain circumstances is Lay to Sol. So listen to the way these all three sound, and when you get them all in your head, you'll finally start to sort of understand the sound of this fully diminished chord. So you have Ti, Do, you have Fa, Mi, and then you have Lay, Sol, right? The Lay, Sol is very dramatic, isn't it? Now I put all those together and I get this. That's the sound of a diminished chord resolving to a major tonic. So a 7/7 chord resolving to a 1 chord. Okay? So that's where it's going to come up in music. It's going to be a 7/7 chord. I wanted to play one more thing before I let you go. And the last thing I'm going to play is going to show you how composers use the symmetry of this chord to create some really, really gripping and beautiful modulations. So let's take a look at the fully diminished chord on C. So we have C, E flat, G flat, and technically B double flat. I know, it's so annoying not to just call it A, but we should technically call it B double flat. Now, one thing I want to show you is that from this chord, if we take any of the 4 tones and let that tone resolve down by a half step, the result is going to be a dominant chord Okay? So for example, if I take the C and resolve it down to B, I now have a dominant chord because remember I said earlier in the video that the upper structure of a dominant chord is a diminished triad. And a fully diminished seventh chord is just a diminished triad on top of a minor third. So if I take any of these four notes and widen that particular interval to a major third, then I have the shape of a dominant chord, because now my first interval is a major, and then I have two minor thirds, which is in fact the definition of a dominant seventh chord. So, in his Pathetique Sonata, Ludwig van Beethoven, uses this fact to great effect. So he's in G minor. Now that whole sequence has a variety of different diminished chords in it, but at this point he's using the diminished chord in the expected fashion, right? But now listen to this. Did you hear that pivotal moment where one tone of that fully diminished chord just slipped down by a half step and the whole mood changed and we went in a completely new direction into a new key? I'll do it again. Ready? There's G minor. G minor. Now listen to this part. Watch my left hand. New key, right? We're now in the related key of E minor. E minor is a minor third away from G minor. That's because the fully diminished chord creates four pathways that are each a minor third apart from each other. So the fully diminished chord is like a roundabout. You enter on one path, and there are four different ways you can exit. One of them is the way you came, but you can also go off either one minor third apart, two minor thirds apart, three minor thirds apart, or if you choose to go four minor thirds, four minor thirds is one octave. So that would bring you back to the same place that you started. So that is the magic of the fully diminished chord, in that it has this four-way symmetry because it splits the octave into four equal segments of minor thirds. So let's just quickly sing the fully diminished chord, and then I will let you go. So here we go. Da, 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 da. Okay, so those are all the same interval. Now let's do da, 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 da. That would be with whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. By the way, if you sing a pattern of whole steps and half steps all the way through an octave, that is actually called a diminished scale or an octatonic scale. Da 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 da. It's kind of hard to sing, but give it a try. So I hope you all enjoyed this quick little lesson about diminished chords. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions about this topic, and I'll see you next time.